It's not okay. It's necessary. What the hell are we going to do without men? You look around the city here, you see all these buildings go up. These men, they're doing impossible things. They're under the streets, working on the sewers. They're up on the power lines in the storms and the rain. They're keeping this impossible infrastructure functioning. This thing that works in a miraculous manner. They work themselves to death, and often literally. And the gratitude for that is sorely lacking, especially among the people who should be most grateful. You see university professors, especially of the social justice bent, who are among the most protected and privileged people that the world has ever produced. They take everything they have for granted, failing to understand entirely that there's a massive infrastructure of unbelievably hardworking, solidly laboring, working class men breaking themselves in half on a regular basis, making sure that everything that always breaks works. And so a little gratitude for that is in order. And it's very useful to tell everyone, not just men, that they have an important role to play, a necessary role, and that if they act properly and honestly and forthrightly, that they can put their lives together and they can help their families and they can make their communities better, and that's not toxic masculinity, that appalling phrase. It's what keeps the world going round. If we had any sense, we'd understand that, instead of doing everything at every possible moment to label what we have in the West as oppressive and patriarchal and fundamentally predicated on power, of all the insane propositions.
I do also think that there is a particular crisis with regards to what might be described as proper pathways to masculinity. I also think that's at play. So I think there's two factors. But I don't think, and Kathy Newman kind of went after me about this, she said, well, if you're directing your message towards young men, which I wasn't, but assuming that's the case, isn't that divisive? And I would say, well, I don't think it is divisive, because first of all, the masculine in women also needs to be developed. It's very, very important. And the people who are the enemies of the masculine in men are also the enemies of the masculine in women. So if you overprotect your sons, let's say, you overprotect them in part and weaken them because you're afraid of their masculine energy, you're going to do exactly the same thing to your daughters.
I think you could think about it as a consequence, in some sense, of the lack of a concept of original sin, oddly enough. I mean, people bear an existential burden, it's an intrinsic part of life to, I suppose, to feel guilty in relationship to nature and to feel guilty in relationship to culture. It's difficult for us to live in harmony with the natural world, and for the natural world to live in harmony with us, by the way. And none of us are all we could be on the social front. And one of the consequences, and so we have that sense intrinsically, that there's a lack in us that needs to be redressed. And unfortunately, that can be weaponized, and has been. And what I see happening to young men in particular, boys as well, not just young men, and maybe even, maybe starting at the age of toddlers, is that we have this sense in the world that human beings live in antagonism to nature, and that we're actually a malevolent force, and that our social structures, which are clearly capable of the commission of atrocity, are fundamentally oppressive, patriarchal in their nature. And so then if you're a male in a society with that ethos, the motive force that drives you into the world to live is associated with rapaciousness and despoliation on the natural front, and then oppression and atrocity on the social front. It's like, well then, if you're the least bit conscientious, because this sort of accusation hurts conscientious young men the most, then the best you can do is, well, let's say castrate yourself. How would that be? And that would be real comical, except that it's also happening. So
I guess that's why I think there's a crisis. And there's something serious at the root of it, right? Because we do have to take the fact of the potential damage we can do to the natural world and the social world. We have to take that seriously, but the proper consequence of taking that seriously is not to commit hara-kiri, let's say, in a fit of moral anxiety and take yourself completely out of the game. But that's the insistence now, and it's really, and I see that psychoanalytically, you know, I see that as a manifestation at a symbolic level of something like, well, symbolically, that's associated with the devouring mother, right? It's an overweening and destructive false compassion that has this devouring quality. And that's basically where we're at.
I think it's because in a deep level, the West has lost faith in the idea of masculinity. Now, that's no different than the death of God. It's the same thing. And Nietzsche knew what the consequence of that would be. I mean, that's most of what he wrote about, you know, and so you'd say, well, the divine symbol of masculinity has been obliterated. Well, so then what do you expect? What's going to happen? That means masculinity is going to become weak. And especially if the symbol is also denigrated, right, which it definitely is. So what that means is that the ideal that man could aspire to is denigrated. And, well, then with your ideal in tatters, you're weak. That's definitional. So I think the reason that men have been responding positively to my thinking, let's say, is that I don't buy any of that. I like the masculine spirit. It's necessary, and it's not fundamentally carnage and pillaging. It's not fundamentally rape culture. You know, it's not fundamentally world destroying. And all of those things all of those aspersions have been cast upon it. That's partly the guilt of Western society for technological progress, even. And those are reasonable challenges to be set before men, but they're not reasonable accusations to swallow without criticism.